Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the Hearth Within for a wonderful session this evening. Sunday, December 17th, we are very proud to celebrate Sanjukta Dasgupta's very special book, Indomitable Draupadi. The book arrived sometime last December, and it has really been a wonder of a book with its very strong feminist poems and its voice for the migrant communities across the world. This book raises questions, I think, which will be effectively discussed on a wonderful panel that we have this evening and by poets who will be reading selections from the book. Thank you very much for being a part of this session. And in order to formally welcome all of you, I would like to invite Jaideep sir. Jaideep sir, over to you.
Thank you so much. We are very fortunate, Sangjukta Di. Thank you so much for giving Hearth Within the opportunity to launch virtually for after almost 1 year. So we are very proud here in this evening, whatever time zone we are, possibly Anita Di's, it's a morning time. And good morning, Anita Di, as well. From Snapshot, which was published in 1997, Sangjukta Di's journey to Indomitable Draupadi is a rare fabric, as we have already talked about it. And it's a book by Sangjukta Di that holds more meaning than that the poems apparently convey, because in this particular short introductory note, I went to actually have a clue that poems on Gandhi, Kunti, Draupadi in many forms, argumentative Draupadi, Hasari, dearness of Draupadi, goddess Kali, then Draupadi's dilemma, Ohilla, Madri, Shita, the mythical women's victimhood and their emancipation, which forms a large section of her poems in this particular collection. In this particular collection, there is always a kind of patriarchy and a kind of feminist sensibility that Bashudhara has already hinted at, self-love. The secular Saraswati, that's very interesting. And of course, references to Hathras, some of the events in Hyderabad, as well as Hashkali, which are against the homingness of words, and also they disturb us. And how poems are rain of colors, quoting rain of colors from Sangjukta Di's own words. And it is more light to the confident corpus of Indian poetry in English in recent times. And this particular book is really moving, and almost all the poems, we need to return to them again and again, many times, in many seasons, so that we have different shades of meanings of this particular collection. And the collection is here and now to everywhere. We want this collection to go everywhere. And it's a wonderful panel in this evening. No need to mention any one of them. So I am eagerly looking forward to be enlightened. Thank you, Sangjukta Di, for the opportunity. Thanks to each and everyone present here. Over to Vashudhara to formally start the program, I think.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And as Jaideep sir has very rightly pointed out, the poems disturb in many ways. The title itself, Indomitable Draupadi, there are two segments to it. There is the indomitable spirit of the collection, and there is of course Draupadi herself, who is a timeless symbol of many of the injustices that are represented within the family of it is women. I mean, she's talking about the injustices of women, but she's more significantly a victim of family politics. So Draupadi stands at a very important intersection in Indian womanhood. And I think by associating the idea of indomitable with the idea of Draupadi, there is a kind of seeking of a tradition within the book, as Sir pointed out, through various mythological women here. And also trying to buttress this tradition by intersectionally aligning it with a number of marginal groups across the world. So it is not just women here who occupy the pages of the book, it is also equally several marginal voices that need to be heard, that need to be catered to today. Often with Sanjukta, these poems, we realize that newspaper reports, headlines, advertisements, these cultural scripts very conveniently, make their way into her poems. And that adds a sense of topicality. Whereas when she associates them, with a lasting tradition of women's oppression in our culture, that brings in an element of universality. So both topicality and universality, I think, line these poems as the cultural images from one age and another come together in a very, very poetic anachronism. So I think to talk about the various layers of the book, we have a fabulous series of feminist experts. I would like to say that this is a strong feminist panel which will be talking about the collection and which will be reading from it. And we are very delighted that we could have those whom we wanted to have here. So thank you very much for joining us. And I would like to begin the discussion by inviting Professor Ranu Uniyal to talk about the collection, a poet and a prolific scholar from Lucknow. Ranu Uniyal, ma'am, over to you.
Sudhara, thank you, Joydeep, and it's a pleasure to be able to become a part of this discussion. And Sanjukta Di, I have gone through these poems. I've read your earlier works as well, Lakshmi, Sita, and now Draupadi. In your own words, your poetry has a certain element of activism, wherein you say that my writing is my activism. And let me tell the readers, the audience here, that there is this magical creative energy which does take you by surprise. These are poems of protest. They are poems of defiance. They are poems of indestructible spirit of women. And it is the variety of themes that strike you in this collection, Indomitable Draupadi. They are women of flesh and blood. They are women who have transgressed, who have been victimized, who are rebellious, who have suffered, and these are women who become the voice of every woman in this country. And it is this relentless battle of the invincible, uncrowned queens that she speaks of with grit, with courage, with pain and sorrow. They do give us some food for thought. These are the women who force us to stare, to scrutinize, and slap those who perpetuate violence and crimes against women. A question that is often asked to a poet, and especially if you are a woman who writes and whines. This question is, why do you write? Why do you whine? This world is yours and as much mine. And it also reminds me of Kamala Das's introduction, where she raised a similar query. Don't write in English, they said. And she comes up with a counter argument. Why not let me speak in any language I like? Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta's poetry rings with a similar urgency. It has that note of caution. It bears a sense of responsibility that poets owe to the society, the world they inhabit, because poets do not write in a vacuum, nor does Sanjukta Di. You see, these are poems of protest. They are also poems that reflect her anger. But then, an aspect that I was really intrigued by, and it really took me by surprise, was that element of humor in her poetry. And here there is this poem called Karwa Chauth, the moon track. It's a very beautiful poem, and in this age of consumerism, if on one hand she's talking about crimes against women, she's also, raising questions related to the material world that we live in. And here's a short poem that I would like to read. Karwa Chauth, the moon track. Instead of all eyes for the declining moon, the spousal partners browse the apps, booked candlelight, poolside dinners. The user-friendly plastic cards did the rest. Excited, competitive hunters and gatherers, then raced to unburden in shopping malls. Adorned with psychedelic clothes and accessories, the fasting women broke their fasts and feasted with gusto and giggles in five-star hotels and resorts as their husbands beamed like the full moon, though the credit for moonbeams is the sun's, where the mind is nowhere and the head is held high, balancing cascading waves or straightened tresses, lengthened with warm care, clinking of bangles, where the moon sighting is a one-night stand that can challenge astronomers and their telescopes, urban tribes, husbands of good wives, earth, sun, and moon, in a cerebral eclipse, lunar or loonies in a luminous liaison, on a moon hunt as the sun sets, as the moon rays play hide and seek, peeping through sieves, peering into water pots, reflections without reflection, such innocent bliss. See, there is that element of humor. There's a certain whimsical element which is here, which you can read as you see in the poem. Then there is that voiceless communion, because when she talks of, I'm sure that others will talk of the indomitable spirit, the voice of resistance, maybe that of protest. But here there's a very short poem. It's short, sweet, and serene, like leaves to trees, in which it's a love poem, which talks about love and the writing of poems. There's a lot of depth and there's a lot of feeling here. Like leaves to trees. When your fingers meet mine, our dialogue so sweet and serene, unspoken hush between words. When your eyes look into mine, it is contact beyond words, voiceless communion. Like leaves to trees in spring, like falling leaves in autumn, like the bare branches of winter, poems appear, disappear, reappear. See, most of these poems are poems which have a lot of, feeling. There's so much of warmth there and affection and the desire to live and to love. But then, on the other hand, we have poems that speak of acts of violence against women, acid attack, rape. There is this poem on page 66, Splash, the acid attack. It has stark images that blow through the pages as she writes about Renu's body. There is anger, there is pain that runs through these pages. Then there is a poem, Patriarchy, on page 72, where Professor Dasgupta makes us aware that as a woman and a poet, one cannot remain oblivious to the surroundings. Here is the voice of Sanjukta Di, which rings with sheer honesty. It burns, it screams, it points a finger towards injustice, inequality, and the inhuman treatment meted to these women. There is something in these verses that actually, when I was reading them, I was reminded of Mahashweta Devi. And Basudhara also mentioned about Sanjukta Di drawing material from newspaper clippings. It is said that the raw material of the stories of Mahashweta Devi was from newspaper clippings, everyday incidents which were splashed across the newspapers, and then they touched her heart and her mind and found a home in her stories. Sanjukta Di too draws from the lives of women and their suffering across ages. She makes the pain of the suffering woman her cause for concern, her subject of inquiry, and perhaps this is what makes her a poet activist, a poet who actively denounces discrimination, speaks of discord, and very strongly voices her opinion against devaluation of women in our society. Thank you. Thank you, Sanjukta Di.
Thank you so much, Ranu ma'am, for bringing out very, very specific ideas within these poems. I think I thoroughly agree with your, identification of humor. Wit and humor marks Sanjukta Dasgupta's poetry very strongly. And I think that is very, very necessary to make her social messages palatable, because most of the time the reality that is dealt with in these poems is very harsh. And I think that it becomes a the employment of humor becomes a very specific strategy, a feminist, subversive strategy, to make it palatable to the patriarchal audience that these poems are addressing. So I'm so glad you pointed that out. Thank you very much. And to continue the discussion, I would now like to invite Anita Nahal, who is joining us, who's poet, professor, critic, short story writer, also recently has published a full-length novel. So welcome, and she's joining us from the US. Anita Nahal, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Vasudhara and Joydeep, for inviting me to be part of this panel discussion with stellar writers on it. And I'm really happy here to celebrate Sanjukta Dasgupta and her book. Let me begin by saying that when I read a book, the title of the book and the declaration therein carry much relevance, as these reveal the clear message the author wishes to convey. Having known Sanjukta Dasgupta for some time now, and being aware of her extremely dynamic, beautiful, positive, and no-nonsense personality, it is no surprise that the title of her book is Indomitable Draupadi, one of my favorite mythological beings besides goddess Kali, also written about in Sanjukta's collection. She also writes about Sita, Lakshmi, Durga, Parvati, Saraswati, Kunti, Ahilya, and Madri. But the tangible, heartfelt impact is resultant of Draupadi's doing. Therefore, by titling her book Indomitable Draupadi, Sanjukta Dasgupta is signaling forthrightly that for her, the epitome of strength, courage, resilience, and feminist renaissance, time after time, is Draupadi. In her dedication, she further enhances the point by saying, for all argumentative Draupadis of the world, resist, rebel, reinvent, reimagine. And this made me smile because of the word argumentative. To me, Sanjukta seems to be saying to men and to women, yes, some of us could be argumentative, but there is a reason for it. And it might be due to some men and some women who push us to being as such. It reminded me of the title of one of my books, What's Wrong Does Kali Women? It's like a challenge. So I get there, Sanjukta. I'm with you on that. Given the thematic concentration in her poetry on Draupadi and other women from Hindu mythology, to me, Sanjukta is a mythologist and an Indologist. She seems to be a deep, lifelong learner of Hinduism who has carefully and thoughtfully crafted a collection of poems that is an expose on women's abuse, hatred, harm, disrespect, and also of their resistance and struggle from freedom, which draws its source or its richness from the lineage of mythological female figures from Indian mythology. Sanjukta is a feminist at her core, not the anti-male kind as some might label simply for being called feminist, but one that is aghast and against the antiquated systems that keep women in inhuman situations. In that sense, her collection is a call to humanity, to wake up, to not endure or bear. No More Silence is the title of one of her poems, page 63. And to that point, well-known Indologist Wendy Doniger, in her remarks in the introduction of the book, says how different the lives of actual women in India would have been had Draupadi, instead of Sita, been their official role model. Many Hindus name their daughters Sita, but few name them Draupadi. To confirm, on page 18 in the poem Dear Draupadi, Sanjukta in one sentence, I'll just quote one sentence, says, Dear Draupadi, you are in the minority club. Along with Kali, Kunti, Gandhari, and Mansa, the fan club is for rock stars, Lakshmi, Durga, Savitri. I couldn't agree more with Doniger and Sanjukta because Draupadi is an oft maligned character from Hindu mythology for what is labeled as her smugness, pride, and obstinacy that could have. We are not sure. Historians like me know the invalidity of absolute truth claims, but we can say could have led in the end to the death of all her children, all her husbands except one, and of course herself. However, few see beyond the obvious to comprehend her feminist, humanist potency, her audacity to reject women's oppression and chart her own path, and her softness that yearns for love. The vastness of Indian culture within which Draupadi resides has been and still is to some extent extremely tough to break the molds of or change the mindsets of, as Sanghita says in her introduction, of misplaced docility, vulnerability, and dumbness as the stellar merits in women. In that sense, this book is infinitely valuable and timeless. In an interview with Vasudha Roy, published in Lucy Writers platform in 2022, Sanghita spoke of mythologies as an intrinsic part of the belief system, iconized by organized religion, and therefore emerges a need for iconoclasm rather than unquestioned mindless trust of practices that have lost their relevance in the 21st century. My effort, she goes on to say, is to free these mythic figures from their claustrophobic space so that they can be reinvented in sync with the contemporary times, the Renaissance that I earlier mentioned. What an amazing quest and journey, dear Sanghita, you have led us on, which might seem impossible to some, yet holds the potential of change like in a domino theory. So to me, Sanjukta's poetry is realism, indeed hyper-realism at its best, for its tribute to the potential truth of Draupadi and thousands of women and all over the world. And as Ranu Uniyal pointed out, Sanjukta's poetry, furthermore, is full of humor. One stark example being the poem Draupadi's Descent, wherein the hilarity and wittiness of Sanjukta doesn't go amiss when he says, Kunti, the confused Marxist mother. In the same poem, the author says, thank God for Lord Krishna, my Sakha, my Mon Ami, and his tech smart flowing sari string. So it's humor and it's admixed with contemporary tech lifestyle. Sanghita also portrays Draupadi herself full of humor, thereby employing comicality, jest, and laughter as literary techniques. The personification of the main character, Draupadi, to wend and to move on, or in true Freudian fashion, in an article Freud wrote in 1908 called Creative Writers and Daydreaming, Sanghita's Draupadi moves in and out of her own fantasies, thoughts, choices, including humor, thereby becoming a perfect ruse for Sanghita for injecting her own opinions and feelings. Not only for Draupadi does Sanghita reserve humor. There is this poem about Sita called Millennial Sita, in which Sanghita pulls together mythology and humor and contemporary tech. Just a few lines from the poem. Sita wanted to fly to Dubai. Sita wanted to gamble in Las Vegas. Sita wanted to spend nights in Paris. Sita wanted a bungalow in Luton's Valley. And when things became tough, Sita zipped up the safe suit and left for the planet Mars. In a way, this book is a bridge between the past and contemporary times, not only in the semantics about technological impact, but also in the usage of words that are modern or youthful, such as millennial, bro, selfies. To me, it seems Sanghita wants a message about Hindu mythology and women's predicament in general to reach a younger audience. And I'm sure these words are going to draw an affinity among the youth. It will pique their interest enough to want to read and benefit from the entire collection. Along with humor, there is also a healthy dose of sarcasm in Sanghita's poetry, directness, and no taming of the shrew as in Shakespeare. Quite the contrary is the spice of her poetry. I think one of the best examples is in the poem, I Had to Be a Feminist. So bear with me, I'm going to read this poem. Boss, because you're such a masculinist, I had to be a feminist. Boss, because you brag and shout and rage, because you dream of me in a cage, I just had to bend the rods and rails, boss. The unbailable warrant you forced on me, I had to tear it in shreds and reach for the key. No bossing, dear boss. We are equal partners on life's trail. If you are adamant, I will leave you to just rant and wail. But if you are not cerebrally challenged, come hold my hand. Come, let us fuse feminist and masculinist into a magical friendship band. Come, let us turn this patriarchal prison into an alluring androgynous land. In the end, the use of the word androgynous to me is a nod to the diversity of humans, which portrays Sanjukta's very objective, unbiased approach to the world. In the pages of this heart-touching collection, there is pain, deep pain, expressed through women raped, dehumanized, murdered, or through female infanticide. The sometimes graphic language used to express the lack of morality, ethics, and humanity is necessary for us to place ourselves in that frame, in that body, and shudder and break, being one with the victim. Perhaps then change might ultimately come, though that oneness, I hope, is felt by men who want to indulge in such non-sentient behavior that even animals don't pursue. This is thus a brave collection, unmasking the stagnancy and retrogression of the human being. And finally, it's an anticlimax, though befitting, that the collection ends with a poem on nirvana, with the hope that the cruel human may one day still rise to nirvana. Just a few lines from that poem. Varied voices of birds, beasts, humans blend with the music of the spheres. Moksha and nirvana light the path of a journey from here and now to everywhere. Even though the focus of the collection are the two central themes of mythological women and rape, this is an eclectic collection with poems on COVID-19, on love, the plight of farmers, the war in Ukraine, pandemic fallout, environmental degradation, and about living and cooking and loving and growing up, traveling and making new connections. There is even a poem on Jallianwala Bagh, tragedy of 1919, and on the animal world called Some Are More Equal, which reminded me of George Orwell's 1984. I will conclude by saying that Sanjukta's poetry is historical modernist, hyper-realist, and juxtapository of the multiplicity of life. Thank you and congratulations, Sanjukta.
Thank you. Thank you. Honored and humbled. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Anita Nahal, for bringing in these very vibrant ideas about the book. Yes, a few points that I would like to, take from your collection, take from your talk, about the collection. So one thing that I loved was your pointing out of the argumentative Draupadis, because I have also realized that Sanjukta Dasgupta very, very subtly weaves in subtexts, inside her poems. So if one is a careful reader, one would, read this subtext of the well-known argumentative Indian and the argumentative Draupadi. So I have observed how, these subtexts are very, very prevalent in her poetry, and one just needs to pick them up. She is also, as you pointed out, the language of these poems, it's a very peppy kind of a language. The language makes it very accessible to the contemporary generation, to the millennials today. And most importantly, I think it also performs her purpose of revisiting mythology and repackaging it in a way that is, more understandable. So it kind of recontextualizes it. So her figures are recontextualized in current space and time, and giving them a current geography, keeping their history and keeping their emotional geography intact, giving them a new ideological geography. Kind of talks about how the past remains the same, and yet, there has been a change, which has been no change. So I think that space that Sanjukta Dasgupta uses in her poems is very valid. So thank you for talking about the sarcasm in these poems, for talking about the use of language, as also of the very strong mythological content. From Anita Nahal, we move over to none other than Malashri. Malashri Lal is a well-known feminist, and in her own latest collection, Mandalas of Time, she has touched upon many of these themes that one also finds in Indomitable Draupadi. So, as one feminist reading another, I would invite Malashri Lal to talk about the book. Over to you, Malashri.
Thank you very much. It's indeed a great privilege to be part of this exciting panel in the evening. All of us talking about Sanjukta Dasgupta's brilliant collection called Indomitable Draupadi. And she indeed is an indomitable writer and thinker and feminist, somebody that I deeply care for and deeply admire. So when I look at the book again, and I have read it many times, and it's such a well-thumbed copy, much marked, so I want to select just one or 2 points for this evening. And I'm going to focus on the quest for sisterhood and a new definition for sisterhood in the feminist landscape that Sanjukta is sketching for us in this book. And for that purpose, I'm actually going to take off from the plank that Anita Nahal just laid out by saying that the poems traverse history, mythology, newspapers, the past, the present, and across the generations. And that to me is a very big gift that this book gives to its readers, that it is a way of re-examining the legacy of feminism that we have and the absolute necessity for choosing and creating new directions for it. So again, this poem that Anita quoted saying, I had to be a feminist, that's where I want to start, because she mentions there, let us fuse feminist and masculinist. And her vision is the alluring androgynous land. So the question that opens up for me in regard to a new sisterhood is, can Draupadi's story and its rewriting be a guide? Anita and perhaps others may also remember the Wendy Doniger question about Sita and Draupadi. I think the renaming and the reuse of Draupadi's name in this book and other works of literature are also a very positive direction. And of course, one thinks of Mahashweta Devi, deliberately calling that person abused by society at many levels as Draupadi. And similarly, if there is a redefinition of the idea of Draupadi and the emphasis shifts from what was done to her as to what she asked about, that is the questioning, intelligent, self-reflective woman who has no hesitation in standing up for her rights. If that is the Draupadi that is being foregrounded as in this book, then the discourse will change. And Sita and Draupadi will have the same new value in the sisterhood that we are looking for the next generation for certain. And our generation in our own way has tried to map the territory from where these ideas arise. A second collateral in the story would be the idea of the Sakha. So as Sanjukta says it's not man versus woman, because who comes to the rescue of Draupadi but Krishna? And Krishna comes as a sakha, as a friend, as a person of compassionate understanding, but also of immense divine power. So if Draupadi has been, remember, abandoned by not only her husband, but also abandoned by women, and as we've just discussed, abandoned even as a name by society, because there is some idea of purity and propriety that has been broken in the story that we associate with Draupadi. But if we turn that whole idea into a different kind of an emphasis on a male sakha, then whether it is a sakhi or a sakha, the sisterhood also does not comprise of only female gendered people. And in that context, I just want to refer to Sanjukta's poem, Break the Silence. There isn't time to read too much, so I won't do that, but I just want to mention 2 or 3 lines from the last part of the poem. Silence is suicide. Silence lies deaf and dumb in the freezing morgues. Break the silence, break the chains. Let the walls, break the walls, let the fires burn, let the voices rise. So that again is the new sisterhood that I'm thinking of. A third point would be, in order to do this, we also have to break the stereotype. And that's another aspect of the book that I enjoy and appreciate very much. There's a lot about body shaming, because after all, what is the core story of Draupadi? It's shaming her in public by exposing her body, that the effect of humiliation of the woman, humiliation therefore of her clan and her family, is expected to be achieved. If we look at that, body shaming is one of the most awful devices that even contemporary society has as a tool against women, but unfortunately women do it to themselves as well. So this is a book which talks about the breaking of that stereotype that only men attack women, but women attack themselves also. And on the other hand, there are many, many men who are also supportive of women's rights and human rights and speak in favor of that direction. And in support of that, and from the book, there are several poems that are about color consciousness. The Anita mentioned Kali, and Ranu, in her introduction to the poems, also talked about several aspects of the social hierarchies within which the poems reflect. So when she's talking about, Sanjukta is talking about Krishna Koli, or she's talking about Bonolota Sen, to a Bengali literary knowing audience, she already has the prehistory, just as anyone talking about Kali would know the prehistory of what it means in mythology and folklore and common knowledge. So the breaking, so body shaming, color shaming, these are also aspects that come out. And the last point that I want to make is that it is through the device of Draupadi that other mythological women who have been listed by writers before me also come up. And I was surprised and very happy to see a poem on Madri, because Madri is supposed to be the contrast to Kunti. You know, the fecund woman, the beautiful woman, the woman who is alluring enough to bring the gods to her, etc. And yet it is Madri who is, in a way, led towards creating the act of sati. And this is a poem that looks upon the details of Madri's, sort of the meaning behind Madri's portrayal, and also the idea of sati, and does it in a hugely sensitive way. And to my mind, Madri's story links up with all the newspaper-related poems that we have. Madri is the same equivalent of a woman to whom certain things are done because of her body being fecund and alluring. So I will just end there by saying that, like many others, the book also ends on that note of nirvana. So although there is anger, questioning a kind of frustration at times with the slowness of social development. Ultimately, the book ends on that beautiful sense of bliss that we have arrived somewhere and we are on the path to somewhere better, and that is a blissful androgynous land. Thank you very much, Sanjukta. Thank you, Vasudhara, and everybody.
Thank you. Honored and humbled much.
Thank you so much, Malashri Di. And as I said, as one feminist reading another, this is looking into a mirror, you know. So the poet, when we talk about a poet and when we look at the entire idea of knowledge, or the epistemology of poetry, you know. So the epistemology of poetry is complicated. It is not so easy to trace meaning in a poem. It requires a very, very discerning reader to read layers of meaning. And I think as a friend and feminist, you have done wonderful justice to Sanjukta Di's work. And the way that you read the idea of sisterhood is very relevant in the context of Draupadi also as a text. And I believe in the context of Sanjukta Di's works as a whole. So when she talks about Sita and when she talks about Lakshmi and when she talks about Draupadi, so while Sita and Lakshmi have been, as Anita Nahal rightly pointed out, they are contested figures, of course, but they are also revered figures in the patriarchal system. But Kaikeyi and Draupadi have been left out altogether of the discourse, and no woman today is named Kaikeyi or Draupadi, except, as Malashri pointed out, Mahashweta Devi's very subversive character. So thank you very much, Malashri, for that discourse. And to move on into the discussion, I would like to invite Seema Jain. And the connection is, of course, Kaikeyi, because she has recently translated the Diary of Kaikeyi and has done great justice to the translation. It is also a wonderful work in its own right. I would invite Seema Jain, and she has been keeping unwell. She has had a skin eruption for chikungunya, and it would be difficult for her to, be on video mode, but she is so happy to join us on audio mode, and she will talk about the book. Seema ma'am, over to you.
Thank you so much, Basudhara. Thank you. And first of all, I must thank Jaideep and Basudhara for organizing this beautiful session to celebrate the wonderful and phenomenal book by Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, Indomitable Draupadi. I had the pleasure of reading this book last year, and the title itself and the beautiful cover page was alluring enough to tell me that I must read it. And when I read the book, I was struck by many, many beautiful things, many, many disturbing things also. So, first of all, I would like to say that, as Basudhara said, that I had done a translation of Kaikeyi. And yes, the coincidence is very significant that, as Anita also quoted Wendy Doniger, that in Indian households, no women are named as Draupadi or even Kaikeyi. This book by Dr. Sanjukta Dasgupta is an intense and poignant portrayal of the fierce and unyielding spirit of not just the epic heroine Draupadi, but of women in general, from the ancient times to the modern. The poems in this collection focus upon Draupadi and many other mythological women characters and go on to explore the lives of women in the present day world, talking about the horrific crimes against them and their daily dilemmas in a patriarchal world from a staunchly feminist standpoint. I think, as Basudhara rightly said, that it can be looked upon as an attempt to recontextualize mythology and to focus upon the contemporary plight of women in a patriarchal setup. So, as Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta writes in the introduction to the book, I would like to quote here, trapped between resistance and resilience. The Draupadis of the world, the invincible, uncrowned queens of families, both rich and poor, carry on the relentless battle against those forces that demand docility, dumbness, and vulnerability as stellar merits in women. This collection to me bears the unmistakable imprint of an experienced and seasoned poet, as also of a passionately committed feminist whose sensitivity as a poet, coupled with an enlightened mind, presents a delightful fusion of deep emotions couched in profound thoughtfulness. The figure of Draupadi in the collection stands out as an antithesis to the epitome of silent suffering woman figure who is self-effacing and yielding. And the book establishes the prototype of woman as a being who can be argumentative, assertive, threatening, and even cursing when it comes to safeguarding her dignity and honor, as Draupadi does in the wake of her 5 husbands' ignominious inaction to protect her. The 64 poems in this collection are about many Kurukshetra battles that women fight within their homes and in the world. These poems are about Draupadi and about other mythological women characters, and they focus upon the cold horror of women's victimhood and also highlight some aspects of women's lives in a patriarchal structure. Some of the poems also portray tenderness of love, longing, and loss, and there are many other subjects that are there touched upon in the poems. The poem Draupadi's Sari beautifully displays the dexterity and consummate poetic skill of Dr. Dasgupta in bringing alive the horror, the pain, and the indignation of Draupadi in the given situation, and calls for the creation of a new epic. I quote some lines from this poem. That sari, without end, lies in my casket, still moist with tears, still stained with blood, furious with futile rage. The thousands of threads of that fiery sari wait like serpents to create a new epic. So in these transformative poems like Dear Draupadi, Argumentative Draupadi, Draupadi's Descent, they eulogize the epic heroine for belonging to the minority club, as Anita Nahal also mentioned, and for not being among the zillions of Lakshmis and millions of Durgas and Sitas who are the rock stars in the fan club who do but never ask. The poet also compares Draupadi to Shakespeare's Portia and celebrates her argumentative rage in questioning the Pandavas' act of gambling her off. She even raises questions about the compulsory polyandry thrust upon her, thus making a mockery of her freedom of choice in the Swamvara. Then there are other poems on other mythological women characters like Kunti, Madri, Sita, Saraswati, Ahilya, etc. And she is also critical of Kunti for making the Pandava brothers share Draupadi like the tempting trophy wife. And she criticizes Gandhari for blindfolding herself for Dhritarashtra, her sightless husband. Then, one of the beautiful poems in the collection, which also has a touch of humor in it, Millennial Sita, dexterously captures the dilemma of the modern day Sita, caught between the orthodox mindsets and her liberal education, her dreams and her aspirations. And to quote a few lines from the poem, Sita was not in chains. She was not encaged. Sita was bound within. The books she read were freedom songs. The life she led, rigorous imprisonment lifelong. So she beautifully portrays the dichotomy of Sitas in the present day context. This collection also documents with great sensitivity and intellectual angst the horrendous tales of women's victimhood and the unabated incidents of crimes against them. But at the same time, she does not fail to underscore the indomitable spirit of these women. I think it's a song of praise to this indomitable spirit of these women who many a time suffer because they choose not to succumb, to yield or surrender, but they choose to resist. These poems, they talk about the tragic suffering of these but their heroic and unyielding spirit. They are destroyed, but they are not defeated. There are poems like Hathras Horror, the Dalit daughter of India. Then there is a poem about the acid attack, Bilkis Banu, Renu Khatun, and one of the very beautiful poems that I really that touched the heart is Not a Body. Not a Body. It's about the it's about the rape victim or the murder victim Ankita in Uttarakhand. So I would like to read a few lines from this poem. Thus somebody's demanded surrender, silent obedience. Massage was the password for a domain where somebody's hungered for young bodies, gobbling living bodies like juicy meat, like ripe fruit. And then Ankita was neither docile nor silent. The poor educated girl from the hills faced the demons like a goddess. She was murdered for she dared. She was murdered for little Miss Nobody dared to defy, dared to refuse, dared to speak. Such is the bias of a God-defying world. Hell is empty because all the demons are here. And the last lines of the poem, in life and in death, defiant Ankita, the girl with a mind, proved she was somebody. So another poem by in the collection is Bilkis Bano, which boldly verbalizes the sense of shock of a traumatized nation at the unabashed mockery of justice and freedom. The poem sings of Draupadi-like warrior spirit of Bilkis Bano as she writes, Bilkis Bano, the warrior victim, was insulted and shredded again after 20 long traumatic years. And yet, God has not said a word. And then there is another poem about the lioness of Kolkata, where baby Susie celebrates her as a role model. And the poet writes, your daughter Ria wrote, my mother was a rebel. You are Ria's role model. You are a role model for all those who do not die before they are dead. And then there are one of the poems which has a touch of humor, but at the same time talks about the ugly reality of women's lives, and in the garb of humor, to make it more palatable, is the poem Edible Woman. It underscores the mental attitude of regarding woman as a desirable object, a consumable commodity in the following words. She says, the pearly teeth, the dew-wet lips, the mouth so eager for a thrust. What a layered cake you are, my love. I can't stop eating you tonight. I can't stop eating you tonight. Before I finish, I would just like to point out one more aspect, that there are some of the poems in the collection which are very artistically nuanced and which are about expression of love, longing, loss, anguish, etc. These are poems like Where Have All the Sparrows Gone? Bemoaning the loss of bygone days of trees, chirping sparrows, brown clouds, etc. Then there is another significant poem, Never Again, which portrays a touching picture of imperfect love, longing, loss, sadness, regret, and beauty. There are many poems about farmers, about Corona times, about the modern day narcissistic selfie culture, etc., and many other significant issues. So, on the whole, and to conclude, I would say that the poems in this collection, they are the outpourings of a sensitive soul and a mature, enlightened mind, with a strong feminist focus on the Draupadis of all times and climes, celebrating their indomitable spirit of resistance, heroic even in the face of victimhood and suffering, and send out a clarion call for justice and righteousness. Draupadi becomes a metaphor or a metonym for this resilient, rebellious spirit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Seema ma'am, for that very exhaustive discussion of the book. And thank you especially for talking about the Draupadis of all times and climes, because the book is not about just about Draupadi, but Draupadi
Exactly.
stands as a
Yes.
symbol for the large-scale oppression and marginalization that have engulfed not only women, but also many other pockets of humanity. So thank you very much
Very
for
true.
pointing
Thank
out
you.
to that intersectional aspect of the book.
Thank
Thank you. And from Seema Jain, we now move over to Sonya J. Nair. Sonya J. Nair, of course, needs no introduction, poet, critic, and of course, as I was talking to Sonia before the session began, we missed Anita this year, but Sonia assures us that it's going to be back next year with a bang. So thank you, Sonia, for weaving and for being a very significant part of the poetry community and for consenting to be with us today. Over to you for your observations of the book.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this session by the Hearth Within, because I have found this to be a very warm, collective of poets and literateurs, and so I always consider it to be the heart within more than the hearth within. And coming to the book Indomitable Draupadi, when you had said that people will be talking alphabetically, and my name is in the S. So I was a bit worried. I suddenly wanted to add an initial like A or B to my name, because I thought, what if, everything that has to be said about this book would be said by the time they reach S. I seriously considered. I thought I should tell you it is A Sonya J Nair, but but then I thought I'll take a chance and I'll wait and watch. And such is the the richness that this book has, that all these people and such great people have spoken, and still there is something left to say. So all power to you, Dr. Sanjukta Dasgupta, for having written a book like this, where you could just go on and think of more and more things. I mean, even as people were speaking here right now, I could think of so many things that we could also discuss. And when I was going through the book of poems, I kind of was trying to gauge your tone, and I felt that there was a sense of righteous indignation to plain fury, to a sense of establishing a feminist continuum, to some sort of a calm acceptance. There were all of these emotions that were doing a kind of roundabout throughout this uh, book of poems. And the questions that Dr. Dasgupta asks in the book are those that have been raised by women since time immemorial. And probably these questions have been erased by men who found them very inconvenient to answer. Because who are writing these books? Who are the ones writing these texts? That's pretty obvious to us. So that which they cannot answer would probably, just be redacted. So the questions of female desire, such as those of Ahalya's, the idea that he who is pure and divine and beyond all sin shall free her of this curse, it's kind of infuriating, and which you have to question. the idea of the narrative of Renuka, the wife of sage Jamadagni, who was so pure that, she could just go to the river and fashion water in the shape of a pot and bring it home. And then one day she saw some Gandharvas sporting in the river, and that was the end of her purity. And then she had to go and bring a mud pot and fill water and bring it. Then the sage takes one look at it and says, "Oh, you are so bad, and you are so unchaste, and you need to be killed." That kind of a thing. Who, I mean, what kind of a idea is that? And which woman would just lie down and say, "Okay, fine, this is it, this is dharma." So the agency of women such as Shurpanakha, Gandhari, Mandodari, Ambika, Amba, Ambalika, I've always felt sorry for those three sisters. They thought it's going to be a normal day of Swayamvara, and they'll pick who they want and so on. And in comes this man, and for God knows what reason, kidnaps all three and takes them off, and people say, "Okay, that's all great." So and then he says, McDanimus, he says, "Okay, two of you can go back," and and the one of them gets rejected. It's all very sad. So I feel that, all of these people, their voices have either been silenced or their stories have been twisted beyond reasonable possibilities. And that's where I feel that, Sanjukta ma'am's words have often taken on a very, an underlying interrogative tone. Perhaps to ask these very questions about the ridiculousness of these situations, about the injustice of these situations. And that's why this is such a powerful book, because it's almost like a process of decolonizing of knowledge. The kind of knowledge that we have held sacrosanct for centuries is being, called into question, is being interrogated as to the justice of it, as to the unreasonability of the entire thing. And, it's not only about the words that are on the page, it's those silences in between, those shadows that she has narrated and liberated. And therefore, the book has these very strong words that resonate. And that's why I find, the emotion of anger of Yudhishthir going on to heaven. There are lots of mentions of Yudhishthir, finally making it to heaven kind of a thing. It becomes such a motif there because of the irony of the entire thing, and the irony of those words. They are heavy and it's lacerating. So, and I was very, very happy about that, because I'm not happy about that man at all. So, and the admission of the multiplicity of a woman's desire is very present there, be it the case of Ahalya, be it the case of Draupadi herself in terms of Krishna, in terms of Karna, and there's also a stoic acceptance that, this earth is not made for girls. So this adds layers to her characterization. It brings her all the way from the back end of history right down to these modern contemporary times. And I love the language. Apart from the humor, there is also a very stinging sense, almost a prick of a nettle kind of sense of anger that is there. In the poem Madri, that I went back and read it a couple of times, there was this wonderful line, that says, "Pallid Pandu's organic sons." And I found that usage wonderful, pallid Pandu. It's a reference to his color. At the same time, it's also a reference to the kind of personality or lack of it that the guy had. And Sita's the millennial Sita, the poem that many people refer to here, it's a delightful idea. If you think about it, it mirrors what teenage and men in their early 20s do when they make these impromptu trips to Goa or Thailand. And when it's a reality for these people, it is just one of those, fanciful things that probably many Sitas have, like, I will travel when I get a job, and then the parents say, you get married and then you travel with whoever you want, wherever you want, kind of a thing. Then she gets married and then they say, you ask your in-laws, you ask your husband, you ask the in-laws cat, you ask all of these people, and if they're all okay, then you go. Come on. Okay. So it's a delightful idea that is there. So there is a sense of underlying violence in much of the work. And I feel that is because it mirrors the lives of women almost every day, the kind of, obvious and not so obvious violence that women have to experience, be it in their kitchens, be it on the buses, at their workplaces, the kind of passive aggressive violence that they have to undergo. Right now, this country is in the throes of a debate about menstrual leave and how it is all being politicized, where they say, oh, we don't need menstrual leave because women are just the same as men. And then there are other people who are saying, why don't we look at it as, equality with an acceptance of reality? So, so there are all of these questions, that are floating around. And even today, women have not been able to, kind of tell people about their agency. There is still somebody else who has to serve as their voice or decide what is good or bad. So, and she draws these parallels, fearlessly between, people, across the various, social spectra of India, of the world around. And, for example, I remembered this movie called Rani Padmini, which is in Malayalam. And there is a very significant line in the movie that, in India, Kerala, sorry, in Malayalam, there is a word called pavam. Pavam is, it could stand for poor, monetarily poor. It could also stand for somebody who is nice, who is innocent, who is sweet, kind of a thing. And often, people look for pavam girls to marry and bring into their families. So, and this pavam girl is somebody who may not have much of a knowledge of the world around her, because it is believed that worldly knowledge can lead to these girls becoming non-pavam and hence too smart for their in-laws' homes, and therefore may not adjust, in double quotes. See, so this whole way, where the rape of the college student is mentioned, it kind of points to a world where, she speaks English and she has a certain standard of her own, and rape is seen as a means of cutting her down to size, which is again symbolized by the fact that her hands and legs are chopped off. Right. So, and what also Sanjukta Dasgupta has done is that, she has not only given us these poems to read, but she's also made us go out there into the world and read up and understand the reality. So it's kind of an immersive reading experience, because she also provides those notes beneath that says, go look up Telegraph India, go look up Renu Khatun, go look up the Hathras, case. And you realize that, reading these things, they kind of make you angry. And that is when the indomitable, Draupadi rises within each one of us. That sense of anger and that sense of question, that very important question that she asks, during the game of chess. She says, did my husbands lose themselves first? Or, do they still retain that agency? And she says, if they've lost themselves, then they have no right over me. So those questions that women need to ask, and which are effectively silenced over time, those are the ones that, Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta has placed as lines on this book, and which will remain there, and which will continue to haunt us and trouble us and make us interrogate. So thank you for asking us to ask questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonia, for that very, very impassioned and very, very humorous observation session that you made on the book. And of course, you kind of, you represent the discussion of the book is representative, of the book that has been discussed, and it has been able to incorporate practically everything that the book contains: the indignation, the humor, the revulsion towards the existing reality, the inequalities, the iniquities structurally. And thank you very much, because I literally enjoyed it academically and as a feminist. So thank you very much.
And interestingly, there were a couple of points that I decided not to speak about because I thought I'm running out of time. So that's how rich this book is.
No. We could have listened to you. But I want to point out that you are the penultimate person in the panel, and all the fear that you had about all the points being taken up are going to be experienced by Tania Chakraverty right now. So you are kind of, you usually I believe that S would be the last. That is what happens with me when I'm ordering posters usually. But then this time I found that I had a T also. So inviting Tania Chakravarty, who has been a student, who is a feminist, writer, critic, translator, also to talk about this wonderful book that, of course, she loves very much. So Tania ma'am, over to you.
Thank you, Moshadhara. Well, I should begin by thanking Professor Dasgupta, that is Sanjukta Di, for gifting us this wonderful book. And of course, thanks to Jaideep and Moshadhara and the Hearth Within. I was, rereading the book when I was told that I will have to talk about it. And this again caught my attention, that the poet has dedicated the book of poems to all argumentative Draupadis of the world. So that's wonderful to begin with. And she has urged them to resist, rebel, reinvent, reimagine. So not just, very beautiful and alliterative, each of the words, that sort of hits us very hard. Now, talking about Draupadi, it's not just about Draupadi, but many mythological characters. But you see, the Mahabharata has always been my favorite among the two Indian epics. Because unlike the Ramayana, where Sita and the other women are, they constantly epitomize tolerance and patience, the Mahabharata has women characters. Also members of the royal household, like Gandhari, like Kunti, and like Draupadi, each of whom has the courage to speak against injustice. So there are so many aspects to this book, and as the last speaker in the panel, well, more or less all of them have been covered, but I will primarily focus on one issue that sort of, is one issue that covers all. That is woman's objectification, because Madam Ranu Uniyal spoke about family politics. Madam Anita Nahal has already referred to Doniger, and Malashri, that is Professor Lal, she has brought our attention to silence. She has protested against silence. So I will once again go back to Doniger, who says how different the lives of actual women in India would have been had Draupadi instead of Sita. But why does she say Draupadi instead of Sita? So I will also begin my talk by mentioning these two iconic women. They are iconic women when you talk about, Indian mythological women. Now, I was just thinking, Sita belonged to the Satya Yuga and Draupadi to the Dwapar. So if one follows the natural, organic growth of a race or a nation, one would definitely choose to flow with the virtues, ideals, principles, beliefs, and ideologies of the age or the yuga that chronologically comes later. This is how a society grows. This is how a society ought to grow. But interesting and alarming, isn't it, that in India, Indian patriarchy has always wanted the women, all women, be they daughters or sisters or wives and definitely daughters-in-law, to be like Sita and unlike Draupadi. So it sort of takes you back in time, which means that the yugas have kept on flowing, but the gender roles and the constructs of women, they have remained unchanged in India. What kind of India? Traditional India, rigid India, caste-bound India, the India, the Bharatvarsh that tried to entrap Panchali Draupadi. And one woman who, it is said, emerged out of fire. So the question is, can you trap fire? And the allied question is, can you treat a fiery woman like Draupadi as object? So yes, I will talk more about these issues. And I feel that Sanjukta Di's book actually highlights issues which are still very, very contemporary. And what I'll do is I will refer to certain sections in the Mahabharata And I have relied heavily on Nrsimha Prasad Bhaduri's book, Mahabharatar Pratinayak, that is the Mahabharata antagonists. So talking about objectification, I have a feeling that her objectification is seen right from the time of her marriage. In the Swayamvara, we find Draupadi, standing with a garland in her hand, etc. This is how the Panchal prince Drishtadumna had begun announcing the names of the mighty kings. He had already announced, look at the eye of the fish, one who succeeds in piercing the eye will be Princess Draupadi's husband, etc. So if you remember that setup, the whole setup was meant to ensure that only Arjuna or a Veer or a valiant man who is equivalent to Arjuna could actually win. But then he says, Drishtadumna says, this man has to be high-born, handsome, valiant. Kulena, Rupena, Balena, Yukta, Tasyadda, Bharya, Bhagini, Mamayam. So here, Karna, who was low caste or was believed to be low caste, he was not even given a chance. So you see, here comes the question of clan, and that also brings us to a very contemporary issue, that is exogamy, which is totally forbidden. Because in certain parts of India, you still have fathers and brothers who might break bread with you. So they will share the roti, but they will not share the beti. So that becomes a sort of a right. So Draupadi also had to choose somebody amongst a Kshatriya group which was pre-decided. So no question of exogamy. And then, of course, the epic poet says that Duryodhan was guilty of self-pride, but he was not given to lechery or debauchery. He keeps on saying that. But what do we find after the Pasha game? Deserting all dignity and shame, Duryodhan lifted his clothes and showed Draupadi his Kaduli Stambho Shadrisho's thighs. That is, thighs resembling the trunk of a banana tree. This lewd gesture, what is that supposed to mean? This also came from his desire to humiliate her, as neither he nor his brothers nor his friend Karna could win her. So Draupadi first reduced to the status of a pawn and then a slave. And you see, then Karna begins calling her a dasi. So Duryodhan calls her a lowly servant or a dasi fit for dusting and cleaning the household. He says that. But then a female slave, that the female slave is also meant to serve a man sexually. This is brought up by Duryodhan's friend Karna. So not only does he remind Draupadi and Duryodhan the duties of a dasi, he also initiates Duryodhan into haughty lechery. That is shown, that is so manifested. But the thing is, Duryodhan, Shakuni, Karna, they were all representatives of the morally wrong in the epic tale. So you keep on, cursing them. Duryodhan for his haughtiness and for his overambition, etc. But they were the evil ones. They were on the side of the morally wrong. This brings me to her husband. What about the husband? After Dharmaraj, Yudhishthir lost himself and his brothers in Pasha, Shakuni reminded him that he still had something left, the doe-eyed Draupadi. Shakuni said, there is something you still possess. You can keep her as pawn. Panasva, Krishnam, Panchalim. And the moment he was reminded of Draupadi, Yudhishthir began to praise the object he possessed. But this was part of a rule. So if you really lost something and if you were keeping something unconventional as pawn, you had to, speak about its merits. So this is how Yudhishthir mentioned the merits of his pawn. She's neither short nor very tall. She's not thin either. Her long curly hair cascades down her back. Her face looks like a lotus that has newly blossomed. Her lips are red. She has smooth skin, almost without body hair. Her limbs are beautiful and well proportioned. Sumadhyama Charu Gatri, and her character is exemplary, such that every man would wish the same kind of character in every woman. Draupadi is such a woman. I keep her as pawn. So this is the near naked description. The question is, who do you blame? Whom do you blame? So if you blame Duryodhan, if you blame Karna, you equally have to blame Yudhishthira. And in this context, when I reread the poems related to Draupadi as penned by Sanjukta Dasgupta, I was also reminded of Shauli Mitro's Nathavati Anathavat. Because in India, being without a husband, I mean, I know being single, that the constant question cropped up. How can you, live alone? So Shauli Mitro, if you'll remember, this wonderful production called Nathavati Anathavat, a woman with a nath, in this case protector or husband, yet the unprotected one. So, and I was also reminded of Draupadi's words before they dragged her to court using physical force, because she remained undefeated in spirit. Pratikami, the servant, went to her chamber and came back with Draupadi's famous reply, which has already been spoken of. Did Yudhishthir keep himself as pawn first, or did he keep Draupadi as pawn before he lost himself? So this will bring me back to the same question. Can you treat a fiery woman like Draupadi as object? To this we may add, can you treat any woman as object? Should you treat any woman as object? So in her collection, Indomitable Draupadi, Professor Dasgupta has spoken about rape survivors. She has spoken about rape victims who have died. She has spoken about acid attack survivors, women immolated as satis. And she says, no caste, religion, or class exempt. So as one of the speakers already said, she becomes a symbol, a metaphor, a metonymy. And I will briefly quote from Kimberly Crenshaw, who says, drawing from the strength of shared experience, women have recognized that the political demands of millions speak more powerfully than the pleas of a few isolated voices. Professor Malashri Lal has already spoken about that sense of sisterhood. And so in order to achieve freedom from discrimination, in order to save ourselves, when I say ourselves, I talk about all women, from objectification at every step of our lives, we ought to speak out, to make the personal political. I mean, there is no other way. So silence should not become the rule, and collections as Indomitable Draupadi goad us to, they urge us to break that silence. And I will end by stating that we should remember as well, Draupadi's sisters. I mean, Sanghita has a book called Sita's Sisters. So if we call ourselves Draupadi's sisters, we should also remember that silence is something that patriarchy has labeled as a feminine virtue to suit its own ends. So if I have a bit of time, I will also, I will also read argumentative Draupadi. Daughter of King Drupad, a firebrand, fiery and firm, a princess who desired a life partner of her choice, silently accepted the command of the metafamilias Kunti. Draupadi surrendered herself as wife to the 5 Pandava brothers. Draupadi dutifully bore them sons. Menstruating and distraught, the day she was hauled by her long dusky hair into the court of King Dhritarashtra, flanked by the Kurus and Pandavas, she argued and outsmarted Portia of Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. She did not have to don a disguise like Portia and pretend she was male. So Draupadi asked how could one husband gamble her off when she was the wife of 5? If the Pandavas were already slaves of the Kurus, how could slaves have such agency to gamble her off in a trite? Her queries went unanswered. Her 5 husbands, wise and noble, sat like stones, true to the form, were passing the buck as Krishna produced the endless sari magic. And demonic Dushasan collapsed on the pyramid of the sari yards he had pulled with such aplomb. And then Draupadi cursed aloud. The curse spiraled around the magnificent court. It rose in the air like a thunderous outburst. Till all the Kurus are dead, until I wash my hair with the blood of the bully Kuru brothers, I will leave my long, dusky, beautiful hair untied, uncombed. Yet, dark, fiery Draupadi did not ask for any favors for herself. When Dhritarashtra was penitent and magnanimous, she wanted her husbands to be freed from slavehood, permitted to return to their abode, and of course, she would follow. Vyasa, the chronicler, proved that argumentative Draupadi was a homemaker, not a homebreaker. Draupadi, the firebrand, died neglected as a second sex, as her 5 husbands walked towards their eternal home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tania Dey. Thank you very much for placing the book in mythological perspective, for pointing out the reasons why Draupadi continues to be an unrequited figure in the history of Indian womanhood, and why it is necessary to keep talking about her until her sisters have acquired everything that they had failed her in. So thank you very much for that very enlightful and insightful discussion. So, and from Tania Dey, we move over now to the next section of the session, that is a poetry reading showcasing some wonderful poems from the collection. Of course, many of them have been read, but we have readers, who have chosen a diversity of poems to showcase the collection's wealth. And to carry on this session, I would like to invite Jaideep Sarangi sir. Over
Thank
to
you
you,
so
sir.
much. A wonderful session already. So may we invite Naina Dey. Naina, please, to read Sanjukta these wonderful, wonderful poems. Naina, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear. Yeah, sure, Naina. Yes.
I think I'm not visible, right? Okay.
You are visible.
You are
I'll just-
visible, Naina.
Yeah,
Please,
it's
go ahead.
already. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So I was like in 2 minds what to read, and then I thought I would. I was going through the promos which were about Draupadi's tresses. So I was wondering about another poem that is, it's a question that we never probably thought about. Now this has stoked our imagination. What happened to Draupadi's sari after the incident? Or if we are taking Draupadi as a symbolic representation of raped women, molested women, what happens to those to the clothes that the women wear while they are being violated? My sari was the national flag. My sari was my sacred womanhood. My sari was my shield, my indomitable armor. My glamorous sari, a mesmerizing banner of my coy womanhood. Then, one innocuous day, strangers invaded the inner court.
Strangers pulled me by my long black hair. They dragged me to the public court. The strangers were my kin, my Kaurava brothers-in-law. My sari held me like a mother. My sari moist and patchy red, menstrual blood-soaked sari. Wise ones still debate, I hear, whether I was truly stripped or just dragged into court for an infinite while. My 5 husbands sat in the court like boulders, their eyeballs froze into pebbles. Did they really look at me and do nothing? My 5 valiant husbands, respected fathers of my 5 respective sons. They sat like stones with unseeing eyes. My senior-most loser husband, the dice game addict, had gambled off his fertile son-producing wife, pretending to be deaf and dumb as his wife Draupadi cries and curses rent the toxic air. The victors of the dice game were handsome, brutal men. The brazen one pulled my blood-stained, gold-hued sari, disrobing me yard by yard by yard. My sari pleats collapsed in a heap like wounded, helpless victims, abject and silent and shocked misery. The great Indian epic recorded my shame and dishonor. Lord Krishna, the Deus ex machina, rewrote me till it became a tug of war, while I rotated wildly like a spun top between the divine friend and the demonic foe. That sari without end lies in my casket, still moist with tears, still stained with blood. Furious with futile rage, the 1,000 threads of that fiery sari wait like serpents to create a new epic in these transformative times. I don't know if there is time for another one. Jyoti.
If you can read one small, short one.
Okay, okay. So I was like, yeah, I thought something complementary to this of a modern Draupadi, somebody who is still fighting back because for Bilkis Banu, there's no Krishna, God, because God has not said a word. Now we have to speak out. So it's Renu Khatun, the undefeated. It was the sweetest dream of her life, a dream fulfilled. She would walk into the hospital, not as a weak patient, but a trained nurse, holding a government job. In her sleep, Renu Khatun danced with joy. A piercing pain screamed through every pore of her supine body, hammered into pulp. Her wrist hung limp, her battered right wrist chopped neatly. Her severed palm lay on the floor in shocked disbelief. 3 men held her down. One was her husband, whom she had married, for better or for worse, to love and to cherish till death did them part. Renu Khatun survived. Her invincible spirit soared and zoomed. She did join her job. Her self-defense classes made her smile in pain as her wristless arm had not yet healed. In that dreadful night of horror and rebirth, Renu, the 24-year-old slip of a woman from the sleeping village of Ketugram, became Mahabharata's indomitable Draupadi. She became Mahashita Devi's unvanquished Draupadi, undefeated, indestructible. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful, Tanya.
Yes.
Wonderful, Naina. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Naina. It was really wonderful. From Naina Dey, let us move on to Navamalati Neog Chakravarty, madam. Navamalati, please. Can you hear us, Navamalati? Navamalati, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Yes. Yeah, sure.
Thank
Please.
you so much. It was really nice to hear all the panelists speak. And like when we talk about feminism, which began year ago in 1837 by Charles Fourier, it was a social and political movement. But nevertheless, to this day, I think protest has many expressions, and a woman cannot stay in a security bubble. And uh, Kabir, the mystic, had said that if you reflect and introspect, you will realize that you are the evil. So, what does that mean? Does it mean that women are evil? Of course, for every rape, every molestation, the girl is always blamed, and that has become the truth of our. I think it's a very cynical approach, and therefore, Indomitable Draupadi is a wonderful collection of poems of Sanjukta, and they really spread out, and they are about the uh, ethics has gone to roost, and if Draupadi was asked to have 5 husbands by her mother-in-law, then does it not amount to adultery? So there are so many questions which are there, and all these questions point out to the fact that injustice is right when it comes to women. So I just picked up 2 poems of Sanjukta to read, and the first one is O Draupadi. As if 5 husbands at one go was not enough, the senior-most spouse gambled her off. She was dragged into the public hall, body shaming, stripping, gang rape by male rapist eyes, inevitable, unrelenting. Ogled at raucous scuffers, denuded of shame, stark, abject Draupadi, myths about magical saviors wrapped her in mystic muslin. Draupadi now is molested, assaulted, abused, raped, and killed every day. In the real world, it is just the rapist and their victims. The invisible gods watch in petrified silence. No one wraps a comforting cloth around the drooping bare shoulders of a denuded Draupadi in our times. The next poem I'd like to read from Sanjukta's collection is something I feel as though the poet's resolution is final, that what is bad, the Hathras rape, the Hanskali rape, the Kamduni rape, everything, all are absolutely, they do not have anything, nothing has been done, in fact. No more silence. When words blister, don't be silent. When liars cheat, don't be silent. When bloodsuckers suck, don't be silent. When snakes poison, don't be silent. When bombs explode, don't be silent. When tears roll, don't be silent. When they insult, don't be silent. When they cheat, don't be silent. When they kill, don't be silent. Silence is suicide. Silence lies deaf and dumb in the freezing mogs. Break the silence, break the chain, break the wall. Let the fires burn, let the voices rise, let the dormant erupt. Silence is living death. To live, speak, break the silence. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I love reading the poems, all of them. In fact, the poem on the Hathras horror, honestly, when I go through the poem, I don't trust myself to remain firm. Just a little part of the Hathras horror. My mother couldn't see me for one last time. My father and brothers pleaded for that one last glimpse, for that one last hug in vain. Guardians of the law guarded me like treasure, precious and rare, womb, breast, vagina, all carefully burnt into ashes by the uniform guardians of law. At the dead of night, and God wept as he enfolded the Dalit daughter of India in his paternal arms. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sanjukta, for this wonderful poem. Thank you, Joydeep. Thank you, Vasudhara. Thank everyone.
Thank you so much, Navamalati Neog. It was so moving that we could not go out of anywhere because Sanjukta, these poems mean so. Without much delay, can we invite Dr. Sanghita Sanyal to read the poems? Sanghita.
Thank you, Joydipta. I hope I'm audible, and a very good evening to all of you. It is always a pleasure to be included in any book reading, particularly of ma'am, Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, but I also must mention at this point, Indomitable Draupadi as a book, and also what is coming out from everybody's discourse. It's a book which is, so powerful, which creates a voice of feminist strength. That I feel that this book is creating a readership also, which is going to be very woke in the times to come, because the incidents in India that ma'am has caught in her poetic lines are history anyway, but it's also creating a literary discourse, which is very powerful and which is here to stay. Without much ado, I would be reading two poems coming out of the Draupadi, or the mythological discourse that has been taken up in this evening. I would talk about, I would read one poem titled Rebel first. Balancing on train tracks, destination well known, is a curdled dream, sickening odor of rot, wings sliced off, arms drooping lifelong. Rushing in a surge, the rebel, the mad misfit, unlocks every lock, unchains every chain. The prison doors are flung open, the pathless terrain grows. Pathways everywhere, waver the flash and clash of attractors ignite new roots away from roots. Resistance is the mantra of the indomitable rebel. The rebel is a dreamer. The rebel is a freedom fighter. Every day is a struggle to find freedom from invisible, silent, and subtle chains, chains like coiled snakes, fetter footsteps. The restless rebel, the mad misfit, with a single track mind, lifelong seeks the untrammeled terrain, pacing that extra mile towards elusive freedom outside calendar time. So that's the poems that's the kind of poems ma'am writes. Basically, resistance is the mantra of the indomitable rebel. I feel these kind of poems completely seal um, the entire spirit that probably Professor Dasgupta embodies. Joydipta, do I have time for another one?
Yeah, one more. Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. I would like to read Murder in a Garden, 13th April 1919. Just a fun few minutes walk from the Golden Temple to the Jallianwala Bagh. He said, as for the last time, he chaperoned his teenaged sons to the garden. The Golden Temple glittered in the April sun. It was springtime, an annual fest of renewal and rebirth. The tropical sun shone brightly on the tropical land, despite rumblings of the ominous distant thunderclaps. Thousands sat on the garden lawn. Their leader spoke, they nodded. Unnoticed, the robotic native soldiers silently closed in on the closed space. Bullets rushed out of the British guns. Bullets entered their hearts and heads. Split open bodies fell on the meeting ground. Many ran, screamed, climbed the high walls. They ran in panic. They ran terrified. They jumped into the garden well, but the relentless bullets pursued them, spitting death and horrific mayhem. The lifeless bodies lay strewn like a petrified still life painting. The helpless grand garden, trapped inexorably. In a fiery flash, a blood spattered killing field. Alas, Jallianwala Bagh could do nothing but to yield. A garden of Eden became a garden of death, a grotesque garden of gore out of breath. Groans, wails, and gruesome grimacing pain, the aghast sky watched helpless and forgot to rain. Alas, even now, 100 years later, spine chilling echoes of sighs haunt the sad air as Jallianwala Bagh narrates its traumatic tale. Thank you so much. And I feel that, ma'am always brings out incidents out of history to contemporary times. Ma'ams wish you more such creativity and such war creativity. Thank you all.
Wonderful. We all wish that, Sanghita. Can we invite Saptaparna Roy to read poems? Saptaparna, please.
A very good evening to one and all. Thank you, Joydipta, for inviting me to the Hearth or the Hearth Within. I feel absolutely honored and delighted to be able to read from this celebrated collection, Indomitable Draupadi. Right at the outset, I would like to congratulate the poet, Indomitable Dasgupta. So, Professor Sanjukta Dasgupta, her book has turned 1 year old, and we are celebrating that very moment. I feel extremely tempted to read several poems from this collection, but I would resist and restrict myself to only one. The poem is titled Draupadi's Tresses. I have more hair on my head than dresses in my cupboards. My tresses are wavy and very long. They wave like slender jet black, newly hatched snakelets, coiled, uncoiled, braided. I wish my long, lethal tresses could spew satanic venom. My long hair hangs like a cape. It is always behind me till I lower my head. I cannot see my long jet black hair, which they say is so beautiful. But they can see my hair. They can pull it at will. It's like a coiled python. Pillowing my head at night, it's like two plaited cobras. The bun is like a snake pit. No one asked me whether I wanted to grow my tresses at all. You are beautiful, dusky Krishna. Your beauty lies in your silky black long hair. Oil it, wash it, comb it, tie it, plait it, bind it. Spend hours running your fingers through tangles. Massage your dull head to fertilize your hair. Oh, Panchali, your hair needs maternal care. The gray cells encased in my bony skull wreathed in silent angst. And then I was hauled to the open court, my long dark hair pulled like a leash. The more I screamed, the more they laughed. The dice board of misfortune lay open. My senior most husband, Yudhishthira, had recklessly gambled me off. My distressed disrobing, a spectacular drama as the Kauravas oogled and the Pandavas sat like statues. I was saved at last by my Sakha, the divine Krishna. My endless sari, a magic shield. No one said sorry, of course. It's a pure woman's life to bail out her husband to prove she's a good wife. They said in a choric voice. I cursed them all. I cursed the hour of my birth. I cursed my cascading hair. I vowed to leave my hair untied till justice was done. Every night I dream of a head without hair. Every night I dedicate my dark, nude body to Kali, my rebellious mother. Every night I desire a life without fear. Every night I see myself hanging from the rafters, my beautiful long plaited hair bound round my throat in a freedom knot of everlasting release. Reunited with my eternal mother, her dark body, dark flying tresses enveloping me, her strength becoming mine. I'm now a cloned kid of Kali, my furious divine mother. Thank you very much.
Magical, just magical, Saptaparna. Thank you so much. Now we are waiting for Sanjukta to say a few words. And Sanjukta, please read few of your favorite poems from this collection. I know it's difficult choice for you, but first you speak about the book and a couple of poems if you can read, please.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. For 2 hours, you've been listening to these poems, and I also had to listen to my own poems. I couldn't even recognize that I had written them, and I really don't know why I have inflicted these poems on all of you, and you had to read them. And when so many professors comment on my poems, you can imagine how I'm feeling. Yes, so And after all those professorial readings, which are analytical, which are very perceptive, insightful, incisive, I really don't know whether I should read a single line of my poems anymore. But since Joydeep wants me to, and Boshudhara and Joydeep, the Hearth Within is the most heartwarming platform on a wintry evening when all of us have come together, and all my students who are all teachers now, and all my friends who have, even a friend who is unwell, like Seema Jain, also, probably she read my poem and commented on them from her sickbed. So I'm absolutely overwhelmed. And I'm also very, very grateful for reading my poems so closely. And now I'm almost feeling a little confident, if not slightly conceited also, that it was not such a bad idea to write Indomitable Draupadi. And I will only read one poem, Joydeep, because everybody is waiting for their dinner. It's cooled down several times. Many of the people at home probably are heating and reheating them. They're losing the taste. So I will just read one, okay? And so, but prior to that, there is one little point I want to make, because time is running out. I thought I shouldn't, but I think I should not forget this. You know, while I was looking up, because Boshudhara said that I have to talk about mythology. And then I thought, let me look at what mythology, how it has been interpreted in contemporary times. And then I looked at a book by Devdutt Patnaik. I don't know whether any of you have read this particular book. And this really set me thinking. And this book is called Mithya, which is Miche Kotha, false consciousness, decoding Hindu mythology, and Devdutt Patnaik, where he talks about the Hindu worldview of myth being very different from the Western idea of myth, which is really looked upon as absolutely irrational, fantastic fables, which are all false. But here, according to Devdutt Patnaik, the subjective truth expressed in stories, symbols, and rituals that shapes all cultures, Indian or Western, ancient or modern, religious or secular, is subjected to the truth of Satya, or also the alternative, Mithya. Not the opposite of objective truth, but a finite expression of Satya, that which is infinite. So Mithya is finite and Satya is infinite. So according to Devdutt Patnaik, again, everybody lives in myth. This idea disturbs most people, for conventionally, myth means falsehood. Nobody likes to live in falsehood. Everybody believes they live in truth. And so Patnaik emphasizes the fact that there is, for myth itself, either you believe or you don't believe. There is no way in turning a myth into Satya, or the whole truth. And that probably is what myths are all about. As all of you know, that myths, there are four kinds: rational myth, functional myth, structural myth, and psychological myth. And of course, the basis or the intent of myths had always been about social control. And I will not go on any further, but this juxtaposition of myth and mithya in Devdutt Patnaik's book, for those of you who are interested in mythology, you might find this book very interesting. I do not want to take up too much of time and weave a huge mythology or epic in the way I would want to elaborate on this, but that would be some other seminar, maybe in Joydeep's college, on mythology and poetry. So the poem that I will read is the first poem. It's called Again. When did it begin? When Draupadi was disrobed? When Sita buried, when Sita buried herself alive? When thousands of satis were burnt alive on their dead husbands' funeral pyres? When 12,000 honorable women, led by their honorable queen, dived into the raging flames to save their honor and purity? When even some time ago, an 18-year-old pure woman was led to the blazing funeral pyre of her dead husband? Sati? Self-immolation? All the accused were acquitted. Park Street, Kamduni, Hyderabad, Hathras, Unnao, Katwa, Hans Khali, Suzette Jordan, Nirbhaya, Bilkis Banu, rape and gang rape of female bodies, no caste, religion, or class exempt, a timeless, unabashed national sport. And that made me write all these three books. That is Lakshmi Unbound, Sita's Sisters, Indomitable Draupadi, and the forthcoming one, Ekalavya Speaks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sanjukta. Had there been more time, I think we would have also loved to, if you could just summarize in 2 lines about Eklavya, what can we expect from your forthcoming book? Because after a long time, you're bringing a man at the center of the narrative voice.
Yeah, actually for Ekalavya Speaks, I thought that the women should be given a rest and let the men speak. And in this case, of course, as you can understand from the choice of the protagonist, that I'm addressing the issue of caste and also the issue of hunger and poverty. And as you know, you cannot separate caste and gender from hunger and poverty and class. It is an impossibility to do that. And I'm looking at all these aspects in this book, but then there, as I do in my all these collections of mine, I mix it up with other poems also. And so this will not be one endless diatribe of Eklavya saying, oh, where's my thumb? But I hope there's going to be a little more, which you would find very meaningful and worthwhile in terms of reading. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And with this, we come to the end of a very, very beautiful and a very stimulating session. So though we have been sitting, as Sanjukta pointed out, for the last 2 hours, I think that we do not feel that 2 hours have passed. So thank you very much to everyone for joining us here, for making this discussion so very fruitful, and for throwing light on the multiple aspects of these poems that they well deserve. Sanjukta, we wish Indomitable Draupadi all strength as she travels around the world, for poems keep on traveling ages after they have been written. And we also wish you, we wish Eklavya, which hopes to be released at the Kolkata Book Fair very soon, a very warm welcome. And we hope that we will come together to celebrate Eklavya in due time. Thank you very much to one and all. Good night.
Thank you, Boshidhara and Joydeep. You have really made this evening so very memorable. And Mala, it's good that you are in the same sort of color outfit.